because, all right, the event is starting. Here we go. We should probably record the intro again. This is Visions Under Construction, a chance for our guests to share their visions and tell us what they're working on. For their continued support, we would like to thank Simwood, straight-talking, forward-thinking telecoms. Simwood.com. Why not make Cloudonics your communication partner? Go to cloudonics.io. You can find everything about the VUC at vuc.me, thanks to Bluehost, and thanks also to zipdx.com, the conference bridge, and to voxphone.com for local rate dial-ins. All right, this is really exciting because we've had two beginnings, and this is a new beginning, but I'm going to show a little preview before we introduce Ethan Weiner, who's our guest today.
Now, you're probably asking yourself, why is Mr. Weiner tied to this chair? Why isn't an expert such as he hosting this video instead of an enthusiast such as moi? Well...
Hi, I'm Ethan Weiner. You may remember me from such technical videos as All About Diffusion and Non-Modal Peaks and Nulls. You know, it often surprises me how many people are unaware of the many ways undesirable reflectivity can precipitate degraded audio perception. And so today our topic is bass traps.
See? Wouldn't you rather have me tell you how good acoustic treatment improves the sound quality in any room where music is recorded or played? Wouldn't you rather watch me explain how the right design and the right materials can make any music sound better? Especially if I do this.
Sorry, we couldn't pursue that, but I'm going to introduce our guest today, is Ethan Weiner. Let's see if he's got video. Otherwise, we're going to start from Ethan's early life. Ethan, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, we have voice, so I'm going to put the thing back on me, and we will put it back on the well, there we go. Ethan, what was your first introduction into technology? You know, you and I talk about this, and we both built transmitters. You built AM, I built FM, so I'm ahead of you there. But what was your first tech introduction? At what age?
Well, my first tech introduction was probably around age of 12. I built a go-kart and bought a used lawnmower engine and messed it up while I didn't know anything. I was just a kid, and the go-kart itself was made out of plywood and and wheels I bought and an axle I made. But I poured, I think, I forget. I'm almost 70, so this was a long time ago. But as I recall, I poured oil into where the gasoline is supposed to go, and I have a sister who's 5 years older, and she had a fellow who was kind of sweet on her, who was really good with this kind of stuff, electronics and mechanics, everything. And he was really nice. He came all the way to my house, like a town away, a bunch of Saturdays in a row. And we took the whole thing apart and cleaned it up and got it all working. And so that was my earliest. But then I got into electronics, age 13 or 14, a ham radio and Heathkits and just wanting to, I always wanted to know how stuff works, I guess is really what you would.
It's really a shame that James Bodie isn't here because he's also ham. And of course, I was at 13. As I told you, I lived in Seattle, near Seattle at the time. And I was introduced to ham radio because some guy was interfering in single sideband yet, so you couldn't hear. We'd have our hi-fi on at the time, and it would be like, oh, so cool, and so couldn't even understand what he was saying. But we finally figured out who it was, and I went over there, and he said, "Oh, well, young man." So I got interested, and then I got my father, who was living in another state. He got interested, and we started talking via Morse code. Did you get into Morse code? Or is that?
Well, yeah, you have to get even the novice license,
right?
But I didn't care about that. I mean, that's like when I went to night school after when I was an adult, I wanted to just get a little bit of experience in college and learn a little. And in calculators at that point, you could get a scientific calculator for $100, something like that, $150, and they were still using slide rules, and it's like so, and I understand Morse code and the tradition of all that, but I didn't care that much, so it was more a burden than an interest.
Yeah, I think I went beyond slide. I never touched a slide rule, although I was told, my parents wanted me to go into engineering, but I never did, and I didn't go to university, and I have no diploma of any kind. But by the way, did you finish with some kind of diploma somewhere of any?
No,
Okay,
no, I didn't. But I always worked in electronics as a technician,
right.
and I did design work on the side. I invented a couple of things and designed, some equalizers and an entire console. The console here was a primitive early version with just basic tone controls.
Mm-hmm.
In an Ampex AG440 my partner and I bought, and you can see some little premier, spring reverbs on the floor under there, and a Heathkit power amp under the turntable. So that console was something I designed. When I was 28 years old, I was working for an electronics company as a technician, and I wanted to know what it was like to go to college. So I actually took off not took off. I worked part-time. The company I worked for was nice enough to let me switch to part-time for 2 years. And I took everything you would need to get a degree in music, a music degree, at the University of Bridgeport. That was before the Moonies took it over. But I didn't get it. I didn't take history, social studies, foreign language, all this stuff. You need to actually get a bachelor's degree because I didn't care. I was 28. I had a career, but I wanted to know what it was like to go to college, and I wanted to learn about music. And I'm really glad I did. That was very, very useful for me.
Well, it's interesting that motivation could get you through. I mean, I've always learned, I don't want to make this about me. I'm just saying that I always learned what I had to learn. And when I got a job through the fact that I was a native English speaker, I just looked through the 12 or 18 volumes of the DEC computer we were working on, and I just read every volume and eventually learned, more than people who would have had diplomas. Anyway, let's go through these photos, Ethan, before we move on to other things. And you're also a musician, by the way. We want to get into that.
Yeah,
I want to get into all of it.
Yeah.
What was your first instrument, and when did you start?
Oh, well, in the fourth grade, I started violin and played for 5 years. And, got to, the first violin section of the, junior high. But when I was 16, I started playing the guitar, started with an acoustic guitar that was handed down by an uncle who no longer played. And I really liked that. I remember, playing like hours and hours every day. And after about, 3, 4, 5 years, I was pretty good. I played pretty much everything on the radio, except for maybe Tommy Tedesco doing, the lead to the Monkees' Valerie and, really hard stuff like that. But pretty much anything else I could play, and I was playing in bands. But I knew that I didn't want to be, 60 years old, playing for, $50 a night in bands. And so I decided to do the electronics and computer programming, and that started, a number of different successful businesses. Not all successful, but a couple were.
Well, it's actually amazing to me because this is very much parallel with my path. I started playing guitar and so on, and I did a few things. But the point is that a lot of people who are in music, especially, rock and roll, blues, R&B, who were also kind of geeky when they were kids, found paths to make enough money to live on and even have families based on their interest in the other stuff. And then you can still always play at home. Let's get through these photos, Ethan, and then we'll talk a little more about all these different things. So sure. That was that. Here's another shot of the studio and the board.
Well, that's it. Well, that's a different studio. That was a real studio. That's a different board I made. That board took 2 years to design and I think 9 months to make. And we had besides the 4-track you could see behind the photo out of the frame is an MCI 16-track 2-inch machine. This was built in the former freezer of a dairy, a milk wholesaler. So the control room wasn't part of it, but through the glass, we busted a hole through that cement wall. It's a very large room. That was our live room. And there's those same Voice of the Theater speakers that we had actually didn't mention in the previous studio are above in the soffit up there. And that on the left, you can see a synthesizer I also designed and built. That's where I really learned about electronics. I have a friend, Leo Taylor, who we're still friends with. And we spent years and years building synthesizers. That was kind of the culmination. And I think we have some close-ups of that. And it was during the building of that I really learned. Leo designed the oscillators, and we stole the 24 dB proactive low-pass filter from a mini-mode service manual, and I designed all the control electronics, and that was over many years. And again, that took almost a year to build, working evenings. So that studio was from 1975 through about 1977.
Okay, that's funny. Another parallel, because I recorded what I think is the best thing I've ever done in a place that was a meat packing plant that was turned into a recording studio. Anyway, next shot. This is, go ahead.
That's a live, yeah, and that's the live room of that same studio. The window into the control room is to the right, off camera, and that's kind of a demo that my friend Master Carpenter Phil Kramer made, and Phil is also still like my best friend after all these years. And that was a string bass I bought for all of $250 used at a local guitar store, and I really liked it. It was a piece of crap. It was a plywood bass, so it didn't have any sustain, and some were boomy, some were dead. But I played that and got pretty good, after, a couple of years of farting around with it. And we bought, one of our customers was a piano store. So we did some kind of a trade for advertising in exchange for that piano.
Well, you have to come over here. I have one of those basses right in this studio here. Next.
And then that was the third and last studio, and that's a real studio. I mean, that was $250,000 of construction, and that's the same console from the previous thing. Though I built an extra 8-tracks outboard, I guess you'd call it outrigger, to turn it into. Originally was a 12-input 8-out console, and I turned it into a 16-track console. That was another big project. That curved rack was also designed and built by my friend Phil, and I built about half of the stuff in there. There's some DBX compressors and Allison Gainbrain and Keypex, but on the right half, the top part is a third octave equalizer. In fact, if you go to Press on Web, there's an article that they just put out that I just wrote all about designing that equalizer. It's actually a pretty cool thing, and the other blonde colored thing under that, and the patch panel, I wired all of that, and a bunch of the stuff on the left, the bottom few units are parameter equalizers I built. And this was a serious studio with serious acoustic treatment. This is where I learned how to do acoustic treatment and how to treat the ceiling and make bass traps and all of that stuff. The control room was pretty large. The live room was very, very big. I think we get to another picture of that. And there was also a separate piano isolation room. That's the live room. And the drum booth in the very back corner is really big. I mean, you can't tell, but this whole room is, I forget the dimensions. But
it's huge. Yeah, it looks huge. Looks huge.
Yeah, 45 by 35, something like that. And the curtains on the right open up to reveal, a reflective wall. And the same thing on the left. You can see the cedar and big curtains. And again, they're the same Voice of the Theaters that I've had forever.
Incredible.
So this is my current home studio where I am right now, though that's an older photo, so I have a newer computer, and I have a pair of 24-inch LCDs, and those monitors are better than Voice of the Theaters. Those are JBL 4430s, and they're powered by just over a kilowatt of Crown power base amps, and I have a pair of Yamaha NS10s. But the stands that those NS10s are on are not adjustable, so you can't tell, but the NS10s are actually upside down, so that the tweeters are exactly at ear level, which they should be. And that's and this room is also very large. I don't know if you have a picture of the back of the room, but this is 18 feet wide, 33 feet front to back, so it's really big. A small orchestra in there, and I've done that.
Okay, and I don't have any indication of.
It was the back of the room, yeah. Okay. And that was when it was set up to do some video work. And,
synthesizer. Board.
Yeah, well, that's a synthesizer I built, and you can see the frame behind it, the case and the keyboard. But this is actually the panel and the guts showing what's behind it, sitting on that bench. So that's a synthesizer. There's 14 plug-in circuit cards. And this was a huge project. As I said, I think it took 9 months to build after like several years to design. And it was a huge project. I worked on it every night. And it was a lot of fun. And of course, when Leo and I first plugged it in, nothing worked. And it probably took like a month or more before we got everything all working. But it was all minor stuff. It was mostly built correctly and designed correctly. But these days you can simulate stuff in software. They have better breadboards, and back then it was hard to you'd have to design it the best you could and cross your fingers and hope when you make it that it works. And those are all perf boards. I did design and etch my own circuit boards later for other projects, but at this point, these are all plug-in perf boards with punch-down terminals and 24-gauge bus wire with Teflon sleeving, all stolen from the company I worked for. Well, I think I bought the pots and switches and the perf boards, but a lot of the resistors were stolen.
All right, let's see. That's the other side, the main side.
Yeah. So that's the front of the panel we just saw the back of. The whole thing, no, the whole panel just pulls right out of the case, which is what we just saw a minute ago.
It's funny. I had the same thing, but with only one pot. I built an oscillator in a plastic case with one pot.
Well, this is modeled after Mini Moog. It's actually two Mini Moogs. That you can play at the same time. There's some buttons and knobs on the left and right. I didn't have a way to make a spring return pitch bend wheel, so it's a pot that you have to manually center. But I desensitized just with clever resistor arrangement, so that if you got the pitch bend pot anywhere near the middle, it was pretty close to perfect pitch, and then you had to go pretty far away from center to get the pitch bend. And it was, you could adjust the amount of pitch bend. But there was one of the things on the left, in the front left, just to the left of the keyboard, is a push button that would on the fly set the crossover point between the upper synthesizer and the lower synthesizer. You can kind of see there's two similar things on top and bottom. And so you would push the button, the push button, and then hit a key, and then let the key go. And then anything to the right of that, higher notes would play through the upper synth, and the lower note would go through the lower. Or you could have it all be one and have all four oscillators at once. There's also a 10-step sequencer in the upper right that could be any number of steps from 4 through 10. And there's a lot of clever things. I could talk on and on about this synthesizer. We have probably more important things to talk about.
Well, before we
really cool.
Actually, that's the last. Let me move back to doing this. And there's a lot of little things that I'm not used to doing. But there's Corrado. Corrado, do you have a comment?
Let me unmute myself first.
Yeah.
And good evening to everyone. Comments. I've been doing practically the same path, but I then veered away from just building, but sitting on the other side of the mixer. I've been a radio producer in Italy for a commercial radio for, let me say, about 5 years, and also DJ in discos and so on. But then communication technology brought me away from that, and now I am practically just playing with telephones and broadband and things. But I miss the time I was playing with capacitors and oscillators and building stuff with my own hands. I have a few projects I still have here in my lab that I built with my own hands, like a small amplifier and a couple of parametric equalizers and stuff, but I'm no longer using them. They're gathering dust, sadly.
But these days, all of these functions are done. Looking for the focus here. All of these functions are done by basically simulation anyway now, right?
Yeah, they're done in software and computers. It's cheaper. Even a small Raspberry Pi or something else, you can just put some Linux distro on it or reduce Linux distro on it and use it as a mixer or a generator of any kind of waveform you want. So the fun of creating the hardware itself to do a particular type of sound wave and shape and reverb and anything that you could treat sound with or generate sound with is gone. All is done in software.
So the original, when I first heard Ethan on the SGU Skeptic's Guide to the Galaxy. They did a little feature on audio cables, and I was laughing. I have another friend who's an engineer, Bob, and he's been on the VUC before. Bob does he's through the video switching. He's big time into that. He's been an engineer for years. But Ethan, speaker cables. So people are selling speaker cables for $100 or something, and it's basically you could use AC, twin. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to use anything that's other than a connection to a speaker, right? Wasn't that the main point?
Yes, and it's even worse than that. First of all, you can spend thousands of dollars on a 6-foot piece of speaker wire, and the people that sell it tell you, oh, it sounds better, it's absolutely better. They never have any proof. They never, ever have measurements. And, audio fidelity is defined by frequency response, noise, distortion, and there's also time-based effects, jitter, wow, and flutter, but that's not going to be a factor with a wire. But, and they also sell RCA wires, and of course they don't call them cables or wire, they call them interconnects, to make them, to justify. And you can spend a lot of money on that stuff. You can spend really a lot of money on wires and RCA wires. But even stupider than that are replacement power cords. And you can spend thousands of dollars on an AC power cord, and all it has to do is just be thick enough to carry enough current. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm looking at.
The question is power. The power line is going through the wire and the copper or the conductive material in very low signal and high frequency situations. Though the material, the wire is made the thin wires is important, like oxygen-free copper, and the way it's built influences the quality of the sound, because it's of course rejecting any kind of interference and crosstalk and everything, but only for high frequencies and very, very low level signals. That's the only reason you want a quality cable.
Now here's where I would like to jump in for just a second, because there's too many generalizations there. When you say high frequencies, are you talking gigahertz or megahertz or kilohertz, right? And the problem of, particularly, I think, and I'd like to ask Ethan about this, because we used to have, when I was a kid, I used to read stereo magazines and such, and they were quoting a lot of technical things at the time, and we seem to have gotten to a point now where they're more interested in giving you subjective opinions about what something sounds like than dealing with its specifications. Right. So is there some kind of publication complicity with all of this mythology that we've developed?
Well, first of all, I have an article on my personal website, ethanweiner.com, called What Happened to Hi-Fi, that talks about exactly that. I think that most of the reviewers for stereophile magazines and the online magazines, but all of those hi-fi kind of magazines, I think most of them believe their own bullshit. I mean, I think they are just as deluded as the people who they are writing for. And the same with, and what really bothers me is I see this over the last 20 years creeping into the professional audio field also. And a couple of years ago, the technical editor of Mix Magazine is on the last page editorial, did a whole thing on the importance of replacement AC power cords. He said, and they always start with, well, I was a skeptic. I couldn't see how it could make a difference. But then so-and-so from the power cord company came over and gave a demo. I was blown away. I couldn't believe this made such a big difference. And everybody, you really need to pay attention to your power. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, you don't know very much about your own hearing, apparently, if you don't realize that that you can't just plug something in and then unplug it and play. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You have to do a controlled test. It has to be a blind test. It has to be level matched. And you have to do it at least 10 times in a row and guess correctly at least 9 of those 10 times. Otherwise, you're just guessing and you're fooling yourself. But so it bothers me when I see this. And now, but to get back to what you're talking about, yes, there are things that affect cable at megahertz and gigahertz frequency, and the capacitance of cable, which is a real property, can be a factor at audio frequencies in some situations. It's not signal level, it's the output impedance of the drive device. So possibly with a high impedance microphone, if you have like 50 feet of cable with high capacitance, you probably will have a measurable and possibly audible roll off at 15, 20 kilohertz. But certainly not with speaker cables. Power amplifiers, competent solid-state power amplifiers have very low impedance, and most even consumer gear can drive any 10-foot RCA wire or XLR cable, and professional audio gear can usually drive 50 feet or more without losses. But all of this is measurable. When these companies sell this stuff, based on just listen, they're completely full of shit, and they know they're full of shit.
Yeah, really, totally. It's crazy.
Can you describe it as a placebo effect?
Yes. Absolutely, and hearing is very frail. Hearing is very short term, and if you play the same piece of music 5 times in a row, it will sound different because once you notice the little ping on the cymbal, and then you'll hear it thereafter. So if you change the capacitors in your power supply or your console or whatever, change op amps in something, and all of a sudden now you hear that little extra little ding, ping, whatever sweet thing in the cymbal or a guitar pluck, you think, oh yeah, now it's better, but it was always there. You just hadn't focused on it before. So there's that, there's placebo, and also there's acoustics. There's another article on my ethanmanor.com website that shows the frequency response at 2 locations. It's like a bedroom size, untreated, bedroom size room, at 2 locations 4 inches apart. And it's a completely different frequency response, even at low frequencies. It's a myth. A lot of people think, well, 100 hertz wave is like, 8 feet long, so you have to go pretty far before you'll get a change. That's not true. And there were differences even as low as 27 hertz, I think, on showing 4 inches away. And somewhere around 70 hertz, there was one location that was a null, like an 8 dB difference 4 inches away. So that's another factor. I mean, if you sit in a place on your couch where it's a little harsh because of some reflection off the wall, and you get up and you change the wire and you sit down, literally an inch or 2 away, you'll get a different frequency response in both of your ears. And if your auditory memory is even good enough, you'll think that that's that's what happened, that it was the wire that was better. Well, really, it was just you're in a different place of the room. I mean, literally an inch or 2 away makes a difference.
Michael Graves has a great question. Michael Graves has a great question for you, Ethan. But before he does, I just want to ask you, how many Neil Young Pono players at $360 have you bought so far?
Yeah, that's the whole HD audio stuff is nonsense. And this has been tested over and over again, where nobody can tell the difference. Even back as far as 1981, I think it was, one of the I forget if it was an organization or an AES article or a hi-fi magazine before they got stupid, did a test, and they inserted a we'll call it a 16-bit 44 kilohertz bottleneck into an audio path. I think it was a turntable because there was some vinyl guy who was like well-known audio writer. He insisted digital sucks. I can always hear that horrible degradation that gives me a headache. And of course, that's all just complete nonsense. So they. And even back in the 80s, early digital, I think the best they could do was 14 bits. And he could not tell when they switched in and out into the signal path, line level, an A to D converter followed by a D to A converter. So it was 2 conversions at, with 1981 quality digital gear. And it was probably pretty good converters for the day. But, even back then, with that level of stuff. And these days, a $25 sound card is audibly transparent. And there's a whole bunch of articles on my website that do these kinds of tests where I recorded through a Sound Blaster one generation. I did 20 generations. So I put the files up for 1, 5, 10, and 20 generations. And yeah, by the 20th generation, you can definitely hear this was not quite as clear as the original. This is a $25 sound card. Then I did it again, I don't know, about 5 years ago when I bought my Focusrite Scarlett sound card. And I have 1, 2, 5, and 10 generations. I forget exactly the files. And it's a challenge. It says and there's a bunch of musical excerpts, so you can't just get it right by guessing. You have to guess correctly on all 4 musical things to prove to me that you really can hear the degradation, even with 1 generation of a modern sound card. so when these digital makers, vinyl is so much clearer. Well, no, it's not. The best you get off a record is like 2% distortion, and the frequency response in analog tape also has a couple percent distortion. Let's get up to 0 VU. It's a little better at -10, but then you got too much hiss, and there's always the head bump, So,
I must admit, I have a question, a further question, and that is one of the things that concerns me. I have a brother-in-law who is a wannabe audiophile, and he occasionally dips into a social circle where people have an awful lot of disposable income, and he's auditioned, playback systems that were, $250,000 or more, and there's just a lot of crazy stuff going on there. But one of the things that seems to be high fashion is an emphasis on digital audio converters with respect to CD playback or streaming playback, and people spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars. And I had two questions. My experience is that at 50-something years old, I can't hear the difference. But further, I wonder about the folks who are designing these things, because when you set out to design a mixing console, you have some idea about what you want to do, and it's measurable and achievable and provable. Whereas these days, when they're designing like a D to A, it's almost like design around the marketing plan, not design around any technical goal. Or do you have any experience of this, or have you had any interaction with any of these sort of people who offer this stuff?
Well, I can tell you that the people who actually design this stuff, I think, are aiming for high fidelity, but they all use the same chips. There's only a couple of chips, they're $5, $10, in quantity for state-of-the-art converter chips. So then all these people are doing is laying out a PC board, designing a power supply and a case, and have to design the board correctly so it doesn't get ground loops and stuff. So I think that the people who actually do the design phase, if they're not the marketing people, are honest and at least trying for high fidelity. But the problem is when they want to charge $1,000, $5,000 for these things. And I see this all the time. I'm very active in a lot of audiophile groups, and I'm there to educate. A lot of the believers think I'm there to make trouble, but I'm not. I'm there to help the people who really want to know, do I have to spend $4,000 to get good playback off my CD player, or like you say, off streaming, or off my iPod or whatever, my iPad, whatever. Do I need to buy an outboard USB converter? And the answer is no. The ones I have a Dell laptop I bought 10 years ago, and it's a laptop. It was a good laptop, but this was at least 10 years ago, and the onboard DAC is fine. And I did a comparison against the best one I could find at the time, and it was fine. It sounded exactly the same. And when people compare, they don't compare properly. If the levels are even a half a dB difference, they're going to sound different. You're not going to hear it so much as one's louder than the other. So yeah, the marketing people, again, at least half of them believe their own bullshit, and the other half know that they're crooks. I know I can tell you companies that know they're crooks. Synergistic Research, every single product they sell is bullshit. Every single thing they sell is a useless gigaw doodad that costs a lot of money and doesn't do a single thing. And there's a bunch of companies like that. So they all know that they're full of crap.
And they have their own conferences now. They have you go to like Rocky Mountain Audio Fest and places like this, and it's a bit like a religious love-in, and that everybody is sort of it's a support group for people who believe all this stuff more than last night.
Well, and what's so pathetic is the one thing that really, really would improve the quality of what they hear is room treatment, bass traps, acoustic treatment. Putting absorbers at the reflection points will do more to increase clarity. I mean, 100 times more than going from a cheap piece of crap DAC built onto a laptop motherboard to the most expensive $10,000 or whatever. And another irony of high-end audio is a lot of times the really expensive stuff is actually lousy. It's actually poorly made, poorly designed. I see $5,000 tube amps all the time that have like 3% distortion, 5% distortion, and I don't know how you can. I don't know how they can justify that. And I see expensive speakers that are really just garbage. With my acoustics company years ago, we used to when they had a New York hi-fi show in New York near us, we would often treat some of the exhibitor rooms, and we would do it for free because we would basically get a $5,000 hotel suite without having to pay. And we did one for a famous company. I'm not going to say who they are because they bought a bunch of stuff from us too. They're a customer, but they had a demo and they were selling speakers, and the speakers were $16,000 a pair, or $15,000, something like that. It was a tall little tower, like made out of wood, maybe 6 inches on the side by about 4 inches high, and it had two mid-range drivers, like 4-inch drivers. That was it. It had an outrigger, piece of hardwood, bolted to the side, sticking out about an inch. Trying to emulate a piano sounding board. Because the last thing you want in a loudspeaker is a resonance. You don't want that stuff. You want that in a music creation, a violin or a piano. You don't want that in a reproduce device. Anyway, so it was a complete piece of crap for, $10,000, $15,000, whatever it was. And there's a lot of that in the really high-end market. So buyer beware.
Of course. Yeah. There's a lot of room when you design the analog part of any device to color the sound that is coming out, rightly or wrongly. There are differences between different brands and of analog devices. It's typical that some speakers sound different from others, not just because of the shape but even just because of the way that the crossover filter is engineered and so on. But on the digital side, they're all copycats. There's nothing that can be changed and nothing that can be bettered with 32-bit or 64-bit sampling or anything. It's way above the capacity of us humans to distinguish if a sound is better or worse. And especially in our age group, probably we've lost quite a bit of the capacity of listening to on higher frequencies. That is where the harmonics from the lower frequencies change the shape of the waveform, and we don't have it any longer in our capacity and our capability to listen to. So again, I no longer believe in all the hot air around super sound quality and other things.
Well, there's another factor in this, and I'd love to hear all of you comment on it. I'll just state it clearly, which is that most people the entire population, most of the entire population is listening to music on earbuds, basically. And I was told this 20, 30 years ago, even, be sure to do a mix for earbuds, because that's what people are listening, MP3 players back in the day. And how many people, well, wait a minute, Ethan, everybody, how many people have home stereo systems at all? I mean, so you've got your Amazon, your Echo, or your whatever all that crap is. I don't have one. But all your home systems are, how many people actually have real sound systems? And who's not listening on earbuds, which are ridiculous, of course?
I do. I have good separate audio system with separate devices, recorder, and so on, and a good NAD, made in Italy, in fact, amplifier, 50 watt.
For sure, it's good,
amplifier with field effect transistors for the power stage. So with a response to peaks similar to those of valves, not so sharp and hard like the distortion that comes with standard transistors. I'm really happy with how it sounds. I have, I think, Pioneer speakers. So a discrete system with components, not top of the line, but good quality on the analog section of the audio. Because I've been in music and radio production for a long time, I could test. I was given test sample devices to try and so on. So I have good audio in my living room. The living room is not the perfect audio environment. I have to agree with Ethan there. I would like to have a good audio music room. There's no space in the house to do that.
Ethan, what do you think?
Well, I have a fabulous home theater that I also use for stereo listening, but it's set up for 5.1 surround. But if I'm going to listen to stereo, I switch the receiver mode to stereo. Otherwise, it defaults to trying to create surround out of a stereo. You don't want that in fault center channel stuff. But it's a very well treated room. It's fabulous, and also my home studio upstairs that we saw a picture of where I am now with the JBLs and the smaller Yamaha speakers is also well treated and very, very good, and it's a reflection-free zone. So the response at mid and high frequencies is very good. But yeah, I know a lot of people listen on earbuds, but and I have several of them, and I have a number of pairs of earphones, and they all sound different. Maybe the good ones sound closer to each other than just a wide range of from dollar ones from literally what you get at the dollar store to $300 in-ear monitors. I'm sure that ranges a lot. Maybe once you get up to the really good stuff. But I want to address something that was talked about earlier with the 16 and 32-bit, 32 and 64. Even recording at 16 bits 44, the fidelity that's good enough to be audibly transparent. By transparent meaning you can't get any coloration. That's why I was talking about even back in 1981 when they only had 14 bits in early converters, they couldn't tell when that was inserted into the path. And also the idea I'm 69 years old, and the last time I tested my hearing, which wasn't that long ago, I could hear just about to 14 kilohertz if I really cranked it up loud. But there are mix engineers. There's really great engineers like Bob Katz, who's exactly my age, and there's it's a bunch of names I can't think of. There's a lot of guys, in their 60s who are very good mastering engineers or mixing engineers. It's not only about being able to hear 20 kilohertz. In fact, it's hardly any of that. What it is, it's about masking and being able to hear it's mostly about being able to identify what's wrong with a recording and knowing what to change. Anyway, you can tell a crappy amateur recording, but knowing what needs to be EQ'd. There's a bad resonance on the tom, or listen to that sibilance on the hi-hat. We got to cut 6 kilohertz. All these guys can hear 6 kilohertz. I can hear 6 kilohertz. It's knowing that, and maybe you sweep and equalize, you find it. It's not like you have to be able to perfect pitch. Oh, I hear that. It's 6 kilohertz is a problem. So you play around with an equalizer, but that's really where the skill in being a good mixing and mastering engineer is knowing what to do, and it's not so much about being able to hear high frequencies.
No,
totally.
I have to agree with that. I still can immediately understand and hear if two speakers have been mistakenly connected in opposite phase.
Sure.
And
of course.
I also can personally still hear if the alignment of a tape head is not perfect on the recording. So if you record something on a tape recorder and you play it on some other and it's not perfectly, the azimuth is not perfect, I still can hear that, and it's nothing to do with the frequency domain. Is about the phase domain, and that doesn't change. And most of the score is about phase domain rather than frequency.
Well, let me ask that too, because we don't hear phase shift. What we hear is comb filtering caused by phase shift, and that's an important distinction, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I can hear phase shift," in whatever. They think they can hear phase shift, and it's only the comb filtering when the channels are combined, and that will happen if the azimuth is skewed a little bit, and you actually get comb filtering in the air because of the slight delay between the left and right channels, depending on which way the head is angled. But phase shift itself, and I have a bunch of videos where I demonstrate this, and one of them is from a workshop. I did 2 workshops for the Audio Engineering Society, and a whole bunch of demo stuff, and they're both on YouTube on my YouTube channel. And one of them, I did a huge amount of phase shift right in the middle of the mid-range, where we would be, and I think it was 14 stages of phase shift. I mean, thousands and thousands of degrees. You would never get that, even from a badly adjusted tape deck. But it's pure phase shift. It's not, there's no combining, there's no comb filtering, and you can't tell, you just can't tell. And now, if you had 50,000 degrees, well, then the bass is going to come out literally half a second after the treble. Of course, you're going to hear that. But normal amounts of phase shift in normal audio gear isn't audible, but the comb filter is. And that's, I just want to make that distinction because it's important. People think they can hear phase shift. And all of this stuff is improved in a treated room. And that's why I'm always harping on this, not because the company, and I don't even own the company anymore, but sells acoustic treatment, but because it really is so important to get clarity, is to get rid of those early reflections from, nearby sidewalls or the floor or the ceiling.
I've got to interject that if we talk about art, and Michael Graves and I are both into wine, and this is exactly that. There's a great parallel with art, with music and wine, and the context. And I was with a world-class winemaker a couple of years ago, and I asked him, well, what was the best wine you ever had? And he said, the best wine I ever had was a wine that might have cost $17 a bottle. He worked for a company that sold bottles that were more like $300 a bottle. But the point is, he said, with good friends, we climbed a mountain, and we were up at the peak of the mountain in the shelter, and we cracked open a bottle of well-made wine, but not a star wine, and it was the best wine I've ever had. And as far as music goes, music is music, and I have old cassette tapes that sound like crap, but they are recordings of brilliant performances. And by the way, you can get the same effect by watching somebody's stupid cell phone recording of something that's great and look at it and go, oh my God, I mean, the whole thing is there. Okay, it's bandwidth restricted, but my point is, because I tend to go on, that what's important is the essence of the performance. So in the case of like the Neil Young thing that I make fun of, this is complete crap that makes any difference. You either have a performance that's worth listening to or not. And it's the same thing with watching. If you're going to watch something, it doesn't matter whether it's 4K or 1080p. If there's something that's actually worth watching. I mean, we watch stuff all the time that's 720 or less, and if the performances are good, I can guarantee you that 4K would make no difference to the quality of the experience. So whoever wants to, Ethan or anybody else wants to argue with me on that, go ahead or agree.
No, I don't want to argue, but it's to me, the problem with cell phone videos isn't the bandwidth. It's that the microphone is like 40 feet away.
Oh yeah.
It's like, my friend's band recorded this, and I can't even watch that stuff when it's all distant and hollow and boomy, and you can't really make out any note. That's to me the problem. It's not, the frequencies I'm sure go out to 20 kilohertz, and it's an HD camera. But yeah, I agree with you. I recently bought the entire series, 7 seasons of 5 seasons of my favorite TV shows, and it's on DVD. It's from like the early 2000s. It's not available on Blu-ray, and I don't care. I watch it on a 65-inch HD television, and plus I have a really big projector, but I don't bother with that. But even on a big high-def television, it looks fine because it's a fabulous show, and the music is good, and the acting is great. So I basically agree with you.
Ethan, we're about visions here, and I'm very curious to know. You're very close to my age. You and I are no more than a year or two apart. My vision is to keep growing, to keep trying to try new things, and I'm learning new things, and I love the fact that there are so many opportunities to change and to take in new stuff. What is your vision for your future and the future of anything else you're interested in?
Well, the two things that I'm interested in are debunking audio myths and the horrible direction that conservatives are taking the world, not just America and Trump, but with Brexit and what's going on in Italy now and the rise of fascism. That really bothers me. I'm not smart enough or knowledgeable enough to know what to do, though I certainly have opinions and I am not shy about expressing them. But I'm working right now on an electronic piece of test equipment that has a novel way of testing audio. And I've been working for a couple of years, and I built this really elaborate thing that I invested about $3,000 literally just into the parts and making a nice cabinet. And it's a little over-engineered and not practical to make. So now I'm almost done with the design of a more minimal version that can actually be a product maybe we could sell for $500 or something. But it compares. A lot of times when you talk to these audiophile believers, they say, well, and I tell them, look, fidelity is what I was saying before, frequency response, distortion, noise, time-based errors. That's how you define fidelity. That's all there is. They say, well, how do you know? How do you know there isn't something else? Well, the answer is what's called the null test. You take two signals that you think are the same or might be the same. It could be the input to an amplifier and its output, or it could be two wires. Somebody claims this wire is better than that. So you send the same signal down both wires, but with the polarity reverse. It's not phase shift. You just literally flip the wire so the plus is the minus and the minus becomes the plus. And you mix them together through a resistor, not even active circuitry. And if there's nothing left, then the signals are identical because they exactly cancel. Now, they do have to be exactly the same volume. But that's the principle, and that will show you all differences, even things that you might not be looking for. If were something that, quote, science doesn't know about, that will be revealed in a null test as what's called a null residual. So I've invented this device, and the design is all done. Actually, the parts are coming this afternoon to build the prototype. I got to design a PC board for it, and so that's really I think when I get this done, if all I can do is prove that a $3 RCA wire that comes for free with your CD player is exactly the same as a $4,000 RCA wire, I will be happy, and that's my goal. I think it will test more than just wires, but that's where I'm starting at this point. So that's my vision.
Sorry,
This very
does
much
anybody
reminds-
else have any?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael. I was just going to ask if anybody else had any questions or anything, but go ahead.
It just reminds me of an old story about Bob Carver and a couple of amplifiers in a hotel room somewhere in Arizona, I think it was, where he quite famously made his little solid state design sound exactly like somebody's reference tube amplifier, with only a weekend in a hotel room and some very simple tools. He then went on to sell some very expensive vacuum tube amplifiers, which is a little befuddling, but
well, it's disingenuous, but
you got to make a living, I suppose. So,
right. Well, and of course he had to degrade his clean solid state amp to degrade it in the same way to add the same kind of coloration that the tube amp had, because tube amps, almost all of them have output transformers, and those things have nasty distortion down at low frequencies and high frequencies. They all have problems, and they don't have enough negative feedback to get overall the distortion low enough, like a good solid state amp. So, but people so often say and I see this all the time in hi-fi forums. Well, this makes a difference. This thing sounds better than that. All DACs sound different. I say, how do you know? You don't even know how to compare them properly. I can tell from what you're writing that you don't even know what is needed to do a proper comparison. How have you actually ever tested this? How did you do it? And they never have an answer, but they never change their opinion. And that also is kind of my vision, is to get some common sense out there, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to get people to listen to reason. God damn it! If I ask you a question and you can't answer it, don't you think maybe you ought to change your opinion? Don't you think maybe you should at least think about why you can't answer this? Look at yourself in the mirror and say, the guy asked me how I'm certain that these two things sound the same, and so. And I know that doesn't sound like a vision for the future, but it really is for me, is trying to influence enough people. I'm not going to change the world. I'm not going to change politics and world leaders. Nice talking. But but I would like to see more common sense, and I feel like I'm a part of the skeptic community.
Yeah, well, there's a huge lack of common sense everywhere, unfortunately, in every field. Let me just call for anybody else. Ethan, you're at ethanweiner.com, right?
Right, yeah, and people always want to stick extra E's in there. It's just WINER, 5 letters in Ethan, 5 letters in Weiner. Yeah, five letters in each. And just Google me, you get to my website. There's a ton of stuff. I have a YouTube channel with not only educational videos, a lot of educational stuff. There's a complete college level music theory course, all for free. It's almost 3 hours long. You watch it a couple times, and it will save you 2 years of it's everything I learned in 2 years of music school. And a bunch of music videos I did, some better than others, but there's a lot of stuff on my website and my YouTube channel.
And you should look up Ethan Weiner on Amazon. He has at least one book that's definitely worth getting. And I don't know, you may have written other books. I'm working on a lot of stuff myself. I won't plug it now because it's not the moment for that. But I do want to just take another second to see if anybody has anything to say in IRC or on ZipDX, because we got ZipDX connected here. I don't hear anybody saying anything, but they may. Otherwise, we are, according to YouTube, 54 minutes in. That's just about a full lid, as they used to say on the West Wing. Anybody?
Probably something that comes from a previous experience on positioning also of speakers. As Ethan mentioned, the big speakers you have in your home studio now that must be at ear level. That is something important, and something we didn't discuss is the new trend of panels, driven by transducers rather than traditional speakers, cone speakers or round speakers. What's your view on that, Ethan?
Well, the problem with large surfaces is they become very directional at higher frequencies. So that's why if you have a 12-inch woofer, you really don't want it to go much above a kilohertz and a half, something like that. A 6-inch woofer can cross over as high as 2 kilohertz, 2.5 kilohertz. So when you have large panels, and that's one of the huge problems with electrostatic speakers, is with a really big radiating surface, and they're very directional, very beamy. They call it beaming and lobing. As you shift left to right, the highs come and go, and there's polar plots in my book, and easily to be seen. Just Google polar plot, and you can see what we're beaming and lobing. That's called. So I'm not familiar with exactly what you're talking about, but I can just tell you that large panels are not conducive to high frequencies just because of that effect. That's why in good speakers, tweeters are typically an inch, and mid-range drivers, if it's a three-way, or like 3 inches, and the woofers are bigger. And they don't, even if you could get a 12-inch woofer to move fast enough, which you can't, to do 20 kilohertz, it would be horrible. The radiation pattern would just be terrible. Too directional.
Oh, thank you. Well, no, I have been following a couple of guys that were engineering panels using plasterboard, balsa wood, MDF, and positioning transducers at the back of very large bits of these different materials to see. There are transducers that you physically position on a hard surface, and they transform that surface into a speaker for calling them in a generic way, just transmitting the vibrations. And they were studying the optimal positioning of the transducer on the panel, if the panel had to be square or rectangular with rounded corners, chamfered corners, and everything else. But then they fell flat on their face when they tested the different materials and shapes and sizes and so on outside of an anechoic chamber. So just in a room there, and you could see the measurements they did on the spectrum on the frequency spectrum was practically almost identical, because it was the room that was coloring the sound rather than the differences in material sizes and shapes and so on. So there's a lot to be done.
Right. The room does matter the most. It matters more than anything. And to what you were talking about before, a lot of speakers all sound different. Although some of them, good ones sound more alike than different. But the electronics, they've gotten pretty much down the last 10 years. Most competent electronics sound pretty good. But yeah, the room is the most important thing. So yeah, if you always listen on headphones, then who cares? But a lot of people don't. A lot of people have a stereo, and almost nobody. And when you see these $50,000 hi-fi setups or even more, and they're in these big rooms and there's no acoustic treatment, and and it's people post in audiophile groups and they say, "I'm drooling over this system," and I can look at it and say, "God, that's got to sound terrible." I mean, I will put my system up against that, and I have a video that I made about 3 years ago. It's a tour of my living room system showing what I have, where I put it, why I bought what I bought, how the room is treated. It's like a 12-minute video. It's also on my YouTube channel. It's Ethan's Home Theater Tour. And I'll put that up against any of these $1 million, $500,000 rooms, any of them, and sure I would come out ahead both subjectively and with measurements.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to close up and move on to the mature audiences segment. Ethan, you're welcome to stay. I'm just going to put up the crunch video here. I think that there it is, and we are going to be off in just a